Mounting exhaustion, no amount of sleep that helps, dishes stacking up. You just lie there and starve. After a while, you do manage to gather some resources to at least get food, and if it's a good day, maybe even get a shower. People can't imagine such a state, let alone understand it, and neither can I, even though it happens to me. Depression is often described in terms that are accessible to anyone. Feelings of hopelessness, anhedonia, apathy. What this tendency undercuts is the intelligibility of mental illness. While these terms are somewhat close, they still do not encapsulate the experience. Rather, they represent how a third person, the psychologist, filters, translates, and understands the experience of the patient. The fundamental experience of mental illness is its alienating nature, its intelligibility that alienates the subject from its peers, and the subject from its body. The heavy fog that looms over one's world and body, the fog that squeezes air and life out of your lungs as it traps you and takes your life, can be described in those terms. A lot of people who can and do experience hopelessness still cannot understand such a state. The experience is intranslatable, intransferable, and intelligible. The body slowly but surely turns into prison, the mind is clouded and can only look on, the self wishes to escape. It's hard to overstate the effect of such a state, how devastating it is. You know you could, but you can't. You are disabled, but what are you disabled by? It's not that society is inaccessible to you. It's not that you yourself, your wishes, your desires, your aspirations, is keeping you. It's not your observable body that does not do what you would want it to do. So what is it? I don't know. And that is the essence of the mentally ill subject's life. In that vein, you take medication after medication, walk from therapist to therapist, and just hope that anything sticks. You can't really observe any effects of the medication, but you still take it. You trust that it does something. You trust. You have to. I like to say that it hurts, but it doesn't. It's suffocating, drowning. There's nothing. The approach to understand mental illness as a systemic phenomenon, which in large part is caused by increasing poverty, less opportunity, while at the same time increasing productivity, is necessary to tackle it as a concern of public health, which it is. In that framework, it is impossible to approximate divergence and its relation to mental illness, however. In it, divergence becomes mental illness or nothing. Analyzing societies through and with psychologistic terms is quite common in postmodern and post-war continental philosophy. Adorno is one such example. Within these ideas, psychologic pathology is understood as a collectively experienced aspect that shapes society. It is broad and to me superficial in the sense that it isn't concerned with the individual and its phenomenologic being. Aside from this trend in academia in the 20th century, or maybe because of it, anti-capitalists integrated some psychologistic terms into their language to describe the bourgeoisie or workers without class consciousness, so enemies. Most notably autistic, schizoid, or schizophrenic. There's of course that King Crimson song, which kind of sparked this whole ordeal, but you'll very often find people who are critical of capitalism using words such as schizophrenic to describe behavior or tendencies or dynamics within capitalism. For example, not a direct reference, just an imaginary example. For example, I can very well imagine someone saying like, the fact that investing into renewable energies is more cost efficient than relying on fossil fuels, but not doing that is just the schizophrenic nature of capitalism. Particularly using the term autistic to essentially describe egocentric and destructive behavior is going more and more out of fashion in my eyes, which is good. But in its place, schizoid seems to take the center stage now. Of course, in that King Crimson song, but you'll also hear it sometimes in an episode of Chopper Trap House or something like that. The issue I take with that is that it appropriates language that describes people who unwillingly embody these phenomena, but it also furthers the perception that mental illness or divergence are undesirable states that society can rid itself of. Within this anti-capitalistic framework, not because they're not productive, but because they are embodying capitalism. The label for their divergence, or maybe even their divergence itself, is understood as a form of a perfected capitalist or the perfect capitalist object. It continues the understanding that a mentally ill and/or diverging individual is a defunct entity that needs to be pushed into confines that allow it to be non-defunct. It furthers the idea that individuals exist next to the illness or next to the personality disorder or next to whatever you want to call it, and not with it. It enforces the stigma and the idea that embodying such things inherently means suffering, i.e. pathology, and that such an individual or entity cannot be in a state that is not suffering. Now, while suffering may very well be a component of especially what we describe as mental illness or what we understand as mental illness, the overlaps between illness and disability or mental illness and divergence are very fluid. We don't really draw very strict distinctions between them. And for people who are disabled, divergent, whatever you want to use, it is offensive to understand them in a state of constant distress, or to understand their lives as nothing but suffering. And that furthers the idea that they are inherently defunct and not just different. Because what is understood as a divergence or a state of suffering is your normal mode of being. Now, of course, this is not meant to minimize if an individual says about themselves that they're suffering, or to say that that's stupid. Instead, I'm rejecting an outsider using the vocabulary of suffering for a person who does not use that vocabulary for themselves. Now, for example, people who are schizoid usually don't suffer under the fact that they're just schizoids. They usually just run into problems in social interactions with other people, but we also live in structures that force us into these situations. So embodying schizoidism in of itself isn't a problem for them. It's just their normal mode of being. The problems arise when they are forced to do things that their body does not allow them to do. The ideas of an all-encompassing defunctness of a divergent or mentally ill individual is, of course, not only found in the language of anti-capitalists, but also in the language of capitalists. Characterized in diametrically opposing ways, but for similar reasons. The divergent body is not only harder to integrate into current modes of production and more expensive, but also less recipient to the capitalistic promises of wealth and happiness. It stands against the capitalist myth just by its very existence. Its interests, however, are also not understood as fundamentally a workers' issue, a workers' interest, or related to workers' rights, but as a special interest or a special need that they have due to their divergence. The issues around their needs are therefore not understood as part of class struggle. In other words, they are not only mentally alienated from themselves and from others, but also culturally by understanding them and making them an other. I understand this as the bias against them in a capitalistic system, which is then transferred into anti-capitalism as an unconscious presupposition. At the onset of disease, the subject often remains productive by capitalistic measures. It is therefore not the failure to be productive that should be understood as the root of mental illness. I believe, rather, that it's the failure to engage in leisure and failure to engage in otium that is the root cause of the problem. This can only be understood by recognizing the debilitating effects of a capitalistic organized society. a subject that is forced to work when it cannot, a subject that is too exhausted to engage with peers or things they enjoy, a subject that has no time to ponder, inevitably loses itself. We're at a point where the subject is not only alienated from its labor, but also itself, the self, through labor, because it is conditioned to not engage with any of its impulses that could negatively affect capitalistic productivity. As this failure of leisure is enforced by the capitalistic system, it cannot be fixed by the individual it affects. It is inescapable, and the subject is forced to suppress the natural urge to change what ails it, therefore increasingly becoming deaf to itself. It is a conditioning into helplessness and hopelessness due to its inescapability. Gradually, the imagination becomes clouded and withers. Everything is indecipherable. I reject the idea that the illness can be separated from the subject that experiences it, because experience shapes the self and vice versa. The perceived normality of a diverging individual that overcame pathology is what creates the illusion that divergence and suffering are one of the same. Capitalist alienation is suffering, and the suffering that a diverging individual still experiences even if they're no longer mentally ill. It is a suffering that any capitalist subject experiences, including diverging individuals. Said apparent normality is also measured in the subject's capability and sometimes willingness to engage in the capitalistic modes of production. In psychiatry, if a person manages to hold down a job, it is usually celebrated as a success, and in fact people are highly encouraged to take jobs or keep jobs, even if the jobs are the things that ails them. People are commodified in the sense that they have to serve the... It's getting too warm. People are commodified in the sense that they have to serve the modes and systems of production. You must be there at 8, because the machine starts at 8. And the psychiatric system mirrors that exactly. And of course that is not only true for the psychiatric branch, but for healthcare in general. Modes of healthcare are a copy of other modes of production. Either to rehabilitate in the sense of producing a subject that is capable of being productive, or simply put, because the people who work there are workers. Of course, very often that is not the will of the actual people who work there. Those are just the constraints enforced by the system. The complete ignorance over the potence of psychopharmaceuticals among the general public furthers the ill-placed demands on the mentally ill subject. For some reason, people are of the firm belief that some therapy and a pill here and there will just make it all go away, which for a lot of people would be akin to believing that a wheelchair disappears a mobility disability into thin air. It serves to reinforce the blame on the mentally ill subject, from you're not getting any help to you're not doing the treatment well enough to you must be doing this on purpose. You already have all the things that should make you better. This is in part possible due to an a priori conviction that the mentally ill subject is inherently irrational. They can't know what's best for them because the best possible thing is being a productive capitalistic subject. If they refuse said systems, they must actually enjoy their misery. Of course, we have the issue throughout this whole thing that mental illness and divergence are not one and the same. However, if divergence results in poverty, and it tends to do, the subject will suffer and more likely than not develop mental illness. And that muddies the water in service of capital. The suffering of and under poverty is individualized and internalized by grouping it with the immaterial, like depression or anxiety. And you're not feeling bad because you're poor. You're poor because you feel bad. There are people who suffer even though they are not poor, which is precisely why it would be so important to make a distinction between people who are just poor and can be helped fairly easily, and people who have a different kind of problem, or both problems at the same time. I do believe it is inherently problematic to disguise suffering under poverty as mental illness. If the problem can be solved by alleviating poverty, is it really a mental health problem? I believe if we still characterize it As a mental health problem, it shifts the focus away from what would actually help towards band-aids in the form of therapy and medication. The common mantra is that we live in a highly individualized society, but I don't think that is true. We live in a privatized society where the idea of an individual is reduced to a consumer and their consuming choices. Deviation from the norm is pretty reliably met with anger because deviation is an implicit questioning of the norm. Why am I this way and you are not? What is the reason that I am this way if it's not universally right and good? In social actions, so non bureaucratic ones, it often makes a difference what reason lies behind the divergence, whether it is perceived as the diverging individual's fault or not, and whether said reason is perceived as a good reason and is acceptable within the norm. However, even if there is such a good reason, violence is unleashed on a diverging individual. Indeed, the sanctioning of reasons is part of said violence. An inherent divergence that is not subject to choice is unwelcome, and in part, that is because it's not marketable. Aside from the good reason, a diverging individual can also be accepted by being incorporated into capitalistic structures by becoming a marketable group. When being queer becomes something that is consumable, political leverage can increase, not on the back of actual acceptance, but by turning the radically questioning body into a capitalist object. That way, the very being becomes exploitable. Ultimately, therapy, even if more broad and extended, isn't going to cut it for a lot of people. Therapy can change the intrinsic limits that people have. If someone is oversensitive, therapy will help you manage that oversensitivity and help you prevent an acute episode of mental illness or distress. But it will not change that you're oversensitive to begin with. If mental illness often is the result of inherent divergence, meeting societal pressures, conditions, and circumstances, as I believe it to be, therapy can't cure you in the conventional sense. Therapy is an aid or a support, like a wheelchair or a walking cane. And like these aids, it is designed by abled people to approximate the abled body. I had the great fortune of being in the care of wonderful therapists and psychiatrists who were aware of that, who never attempted to try to make me normal or anything like that, but helped me achieve what I wanted, what I needed to live my life the way that I wanted to and needed to. If I desire a walking cane to ease my life in a sighted society, it is a different experience from being forced by sighted people to use a walking cane under the threat of withholding basic necessities like food or shelter. Radical self awareness or political self awareness doesn't mean one needs a whole theoretical framework of how society, mental illness, and divergence interact with one another. Rather, it means being aware of the very practical biases against said people within a given system. These, of course, differ from area to area, but it means knowing, for example, that just starting therapy can make you ineligible for certain insurances or can jack up the prices for existing ones, hence discouraging people, of course, from getting the help that they need. And because of that, it also means that campaigning for more therapy and more therapy access is not enough. It means acknowledging that many parts of the system are designed in such a way or exist in such a way that makes the lives of these people as hard as possible or even sets them up to fail. I should also note that I make no clear distinction between neurodivergence, divergence, or mental illness. One reason for that, as I think I've alluded to already, is that socially and bureaucratically, they are often identified with one another. But another reason for that is because within capitalism and its quite prominent stereotyping nature, all of these people, whether they truly fall into the mentally ill category or just the diverging category or whatever, will be identified as the other and bad people based on the fact that they diverge from the stereotype, however you want to call that different being. Because neurodivergence isn't about really diverging from other people. It is about diverging from a stereotype. Because the word in of itself is actually a little bit silly. Because of course every individual is, well, individual. It's unique. Every brain is unique. So would it only refer to diverging from other people? It wouldn't make any sense. People who are ostracized. I should have looked up how you say the word before actually trying to say it, I guess. People who are ostracized tend to internalize the reasons for their ostracization. They blame themselves for being what they are. And radicalness means to stop engaging in that and realize that the maltreatment you or someone else receives because of their otherness isn't God given. It doesn't have to exist. It doesn't have to be that way. Of course, something like less energy, oversensitivity, or hallucinations, or other more intrinsic features to a person, one just sees because of that. But a truly individualized society would give its members room to recover from these negative states instead of perpetuating, intensifying, and in that way almost encouraging suffering. It hinges primarily on 2 points. Needs are not shameful, just based on the number of people who have said needs. And two, said needs are individual and specific and not objective. Just, of course, as a stupid example, because, I guess I am. I feel like calling what I do philosophy is going a bit far, but okay, just an example. We all need food, of course, but how much food somebody needs is very individual, and what food they need too. Telling people with divergences to suck it up is pretty much akin to me telling someone who's 6'2" to just eat as much food as I do, even though they are much taller than me and probably have way more mass than me, hence needing more food. And doing so, even though there is enough food available to eat the share that they need, just on the insistence and principle that because the average caloric need is below their individual need, they shouldn't demand more. I mean, are we sure they're not just being greedy? By the way, if you use this as an excuse for billionaires, I will break down your door. The way welfare and treatment are currently organized hinges exactly on these averages. And we really need to ask ourselves whether it should be this way, whether it has to be that way. I mean, averages are, of course, helpful, but they're not the end all be all. What radical self awareness also means to me is becoming aware of one's own inabilities and accepting them, and realizing that it's outside factors that turn the simple "I can't do this" to shame and then something punishable. Letting disabled people suffer in poverty is violence. I'd also like to note that just morally, from a moral therapy, Jesus Christ. I'd also like to note that from a moral theory point of view, it's not that easy to assign blame onto someone for something that they didn't do. And discerning when an individual can be justifiably forced to perform an act and then punished if they don't. Of course, there are models to do that. What I'm trying to get at is that it's a finicky issue, and Yet we treat it with such ease, such incredible ease when it comes to this issue specifically. Ultimately, I think it means cringe incoming, but I think it means nurturing the will to power and willfully reject the role of the pleader or the beggar. Being unable is not bad. Being unable is not shameful. And you still have the right to the societal protection that is awarded to every other member of society. We produce more than we need, after all. Of course, all of this hinges on the assumption that we do that we more or less exist within the certain circumstances, within the current circumstances. All of this, of course, increases significantly in complexity once you question its viability under different economic circumstances. But I mean, that's just kind of inherent to justice and economics and questions of just distribution. I mean, even if you look at the classics like Rawls' theory of justice or Dworkin's equality of resources, both assume moderate scarcity or abundant resources, respectively. And there's very little exploration of morality of or how things should be distributed if there really truly isn't enough for everyone. Should everyone get the same amount, even if it's not sufficient? Should should everybody get a proportional minimum, or should we let some people die so that other people can eat enough? Maybe there are papers about that out there, but I've never read any of them. So all I'm trying to say is I don't want to hear any conservatives in the back going, but what if there is no surplus to be distributed? And neither do I want to hear the comrades in the front being, but what if the workers own their products? I don't know. We'll see it when we get there, okay? Now comes the kind of legally obligant phrase that I neither reject therapy nor do I reject meds. I would actually strongly encourage anyone who feels like they need that assistance to go get it. And don't listen to alternative medicine shills or self-help shills. They're just after your money, honestly. At best, it's going to have a marginal effect, but being very expensive. At worst, it can actually harm you. I mean, personally, I've been in therapy for over 10 years. I've been institutionalized and I'm actually on an SSRI right now. I've had great experiences and I had not so great ones. It's it's kind of a mixed bag all around. Um, but this video or what I'm saying isn't really intended for people who are in an acute episode of distress. I can't help you with that. And frankly, you should probably go somewhere else, someone who can actually talk to you and support you through that. Um, my my approach or my attempt here is more addressing the stage that comes after that, right? The stage where you maybe had therapy and meds and all that, and you're doing pretty good and you're pretty happy, but you still do not meet those normed expectations towards you, those societal expectations that are kind of forced upon you. Because I am pretty happy right now doing the unpaid labor that I do. So why am I pressured to change that on the back of my health? I mean, I've tried living the normal life, and it made me not want to be alive anymore. I started working on the first draft for this video in November or December of last year, so 2021, under the impressions of the job I had at the time. And at that time, I really struggled and kind of still do, with just not experiencing that creative spark anymore, that kind of creative surge that sometimes just happens. Because I would come home from my shift, sit in front of this document, and just nothing. Nothing. And I struggled, and again, still do, with understanding what made me different from my colleagues, who I would just say are normies, I suppose, but also from my peers who are currently experiencing an acute episode of mental illness. Because neither of those were really close to that experience I had. And that was something new for me as well. And all of this, while convoluted and terrible, is kind of an attempt to rationalize and just talk about that experience, I suppose. Because I actually don't think the true kind of true qualia or the true experience, the true essence of an experience, especially when it comes to mental illness, can actually be transferred verbally, and usually use different media, as you can see here. Anyway, through the kind of full-time retail experience, it started to dawn on me that after therapy and meds and all that, you actually have the means to consciously realize that you hate what you're doing and that it makes you sick, but you still have to do it. You have to eat. You need that money. You have to do it, but you hate it. And that kind of dissonance is extremely hard to cope with. And I mean, I actually even enjoyed working retail, and I know if you had any doubts that I'm completely insane, those are gone now. But the more or the longer it went on, the more the days piled up where I would stand there and think to myself, all of this is so pointless. What am I even doing? I'd much rather work on something else right now. And that's fine to experience from time to time. I've often felt that way when I wrote a paper or when I learned a language, but the thought of experiencing that every single day for 40 years straight horrified me. Does it have to be that way? Why do we just brush it off as welcome to being an adult, bucko? All the while ringing the alarm bells about how people are suffering and dying. And suddenly, I felt nothing. Kind of anticlimactic to just giggle, but it's so cringe I cannot giggle.